He had been the city's most mysterious taxi driver for 7 years. He never talked, never smiled, just drove. The other drivers called him the ghost because he silently appeared wherever rides were needed most. But that night, when armed gang members tried to carjack his taxi, his reaction shocked everyone. Within seconds, he had neutralized all 4 of them. "Army Ranger," whispered the dispatcher over the radio, and in that moment, everyone realized that this silent driver was anything. Before we continue with this powerful story of hidden combat expertise, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. But what happened in those crucial seconds would reveal a truth that had been hidden for 7 years. Metro City's Yellow Cab Company operated 47 vehicles across 3 shifts, serving a metropolitan area of over 800,000 residents. The night shift required drivers who understood that late-night transportation meant dealing with unpredictable passengers, dangerous neighborhoods, and the kind of street awareness that kept independent contractors alive in an increasingly violent city. Among those drivers, Jim Sullivan was both invisible and indispensable. For 7 years, he had been the man who took the calls nobody else wanted, drove the routes others refused, and somehow managed to be available for the most difficult fares without anyone questioning how he stayed so calm under pressure. But there was something about Jim that didn't add up. Something that would soon become impossible to ignore. The other drivers had given him the nickname the Ghost, not because he was unfriendly, but because he seemed to materialize wherever dangerous situations needed handling. Drunk passengers, drug deals gone wrong, domestic disputes. Jim would appear with his yellow cab and somehow diffuse situations that sent other drivers fleeing. What they didn't know was that Jim's ability to handle volatile situations came from training that had nothing to do with customer service. His physical capabilities exceeded anything the other drivers had seen. While they complained about 12-hour shifts and difficult passengers, Jim worked 16-hour days without showing fatigue. He could navigate the city's most dangerous neighborhoods at 3 a.m. without GPS, handle aggressive passengers with calm authority, and somehow always knew which streets to avoid before trouble started. But it was his awareness that should have been the first clue. Jim didn't just drive, he observed. Always observing, every passenger who entered his cab, every vehicle that followed too closely, every unusual activity on the streets. Jim cataloged it all with the systematic attention of someone trained to identify threats that others couldn't see. The dispatch thought it was just experience with urban driving. They had no idea it was something far more specialized. And then came the night that changed everything. December 8th started like any other night shift. Jim had been driving since 10 p.m., handling airport runs and late-night bar pickups. At 2:17 a.m., he received a call for a pickup at the corner of 5th and Madison, a location in the warehouse district known for drug activity. Most drivers would have refused the fare, but Jim never refused calls from dangerous areas. When he arrived, 4 young men in dark clothing approached his taxi. Something in their movement pattern immediately triggered Jim's threat assessment training. They weren't walking like passengers, they were positioning like predators. The first man opened the passenger door and slid in, but instead of giving a destination, he pulled a pistol and pressed it against Jim's ribs. "Drive," he commanded, "and don't try anything stupid." The other 3 men climbed into the back seat. Jim's rearview mirror showed him everything he needed to know: weapons, gang colors, and the confident aggression of criminals who thought they had found an easy target. "Where we going?" Jim asked calmly, his voice showing no indication of stress. "Just drive, old man," the gunman replied. "We'll tell you when to stop." But what the 4 gang members didn't know was that they had just made the worst mistake of their criminal careers. In that instant, 7 years of peaceful taxi driving disappeared. Jim Sullivan, the quiet driver, was gone. Someone else took his place. Jim's first move was to activate the cab's emergency signal, a silent alarm that would alert dispatch and police to his location. His second move was to begin the kind of tactical driving that his passengers were completely unprepared for. The taxi suddenly accelerated, throwing the backseat passengers off balance. Jim used the moment of confusion to grab the gunman's wrist with his right hand while maintaining control of the steering wheel with his left. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the floor as Jim applied a joint lock that he'd learned in a very different context than customer service. The gunman screamed as his wrist bent in ways nature never intended. The pistol clattered to the floor, but Jim was already executing the next phase of his response. He slammed on the brakes, throwing the backseat passengers forward, then immediately accelerated again while yanking the steering wheel hard right. The taxi performed a tactical maneuver that sent all four criminals sliding across the seat, completely disoriented and unable to reach for their weapons. "What the hell?" one of them started to shout, but Jim cut him off. "Everybody stays calm and nobody gets hurt worse than they already are," Jim said, his voice carrying an authority that hadn't been there moments before. "Hands where I can see them." Now, the transformation was complete. The mild-mannered taxi driver had become something else entirely, someone who controlled the situation with the kind of confidence that only came from extensive training in violence management. Within 30 seconds, Jim had disarmed the primary threat, disabled the vehicle's other occupants, and established complete tactical control of the situation. The four gang members found themselves facing someone whose capabilities far exceeded anything they had encountered on the streets. "You're not just a taxi driver," the original gunman gasped, clutching his injured wrist. "No," Jim replied calmly, "I'm not." Police sirens were already audible in the distance. Jim's emergency signal had worked exactly as designed, but the four criminals were no longer thinking about escape. They were trying to understand what had just happened to them. When officers Rodriguez and Chen arrived at the scene, they found something unprecedented. Four armed gang members sitting quietly in the back of a taxi, their weapons secured, their leader nursing an injured wrist, all of them showing the kind of compliance that usually required significant force to achieve. "Driver, are you okay?" Officer Rodriguez asked. Approaching the cab cautiously, Jim rolled down his window. "Yes sir." Four individuals attempted armed carjacking. Weapons are secured on the floorboard. Primary suspect has a dislocated wrist that will require medical attention. Rodriguez looked at the scene more carefully. The criminals were subdued but not beaten. The weapons were professionally secured. The taxi showed signs of tactical maneuvering but no unnecessary damage. This wasn't lucky survival. This was expert threat management. "Sir, I need to ask, how exactly did you manage to disarm four armed men and maintain control of this situation?" Jim met the officer's gaze directly. "Army Rangers, 3 tours Afghanistan, 8 years military police and close protection training. I drove taxi because I wanted a quiet job that didn't involve violence." The words hung in the air like a revelation that nobody had expected. "You're telling me that for 7 years we've had a former Army Ranger driving night shift in the worst neighborhoods, and nobody knew it?" Rodriguez asked. "That was the point," Jim replied. But Officer Chen's next question revealed why Jim's secret had been so carefully guarded. "Why taxi driving? Why hide your military background?" Jim looked out at the city streets where he had spent 7 years learning to serve people instead of eliminating threats, to solve problems through patience instead of violence, to protect communities through service instead of warfare. His answer revealed the cost of the skills that had just saved his life and neutralized 4 dangerous criminals. "Because everything I was trained to do in the military was about ending threats efficiently. I wanted to learn how to help people get where they needed to go safely, without anyone getting hurt." But the night's events had forced Jim to confront a truth he had been avoiding for 7 years. The skills that made him lethal in combat were the same skills that had protected him and potentially saved other innocent victims from the same gang. Maybe there was a way to honor both identities, the warrior he had been and the peaceful man he was trying to become. 2 weeks later, Jim made a decision that would change not just his life, but the safety of transportation workers throughout the region. He began offering security training to taxi and rideshare drivers, teaching them how to recognize threats, manage dangerous situations, and protect themselves without becoming combatants. The work allowed him to use his tactical expertise for protection instead of offense. helping civilian drivers develop the awareness and response capabilities that could save their lives without requiring military training. The quiet taxi driver who had wanted to disappear from his military past found a way to honor both the man he had been and the man he was becoming. Yellow Cab Company kept Jim as their night shift supervisor and unofficial security consultant, recognizing that having someone with his background provided protection that no insurance policy could match. Other transportation companies in the region quietly made similar arrangements. Jim never advertised his military background or sought recognition for his specialized knowledge, but he no longer felt the need to completely hide from skills that, used properly, could protect people instead of eliminating them. Sometimes the training that makes someone dangerous in war is exactly what's needed to keep peace in civilian life. The ghost of Metro City's night shift had revealed himself to be something far more substantial, a guardian who had found his purpose again. The 4 gang members were sentenced to multiple felonies, but their attempted carjacking had an unexpected consequence. It revealed that one of the city's most vulnerable professions had been protected by someone uniquely qualified to handle the worst threats they might face. So I ask you, have you ever encountered someone whose capabilities seemed to exceed their circumstances? Someone whose skills suggested backgrounds they preferred to keep hidden? Share their story in the comments, because sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who choose to use their power to protect rather than destroy. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe and help us honor the quiet protectors who carry specialized knowledge into civilian life. And remember, sometimes the most ordinary-looking people are capable of the most extraordinary things when their safety, or the safety of others, is threatened.